Hey there, storytellers. It's Mary Rose, and it's Wednesday, and it's 1 p.m. Pacific time, and that means we are live talking about story structure and writing craft. I'm Mary Rose Wood. I'm an author, and I'm also the founder of Path of the Storyteller, which is my own framework and program for helping writers level up so that they can write at the level that they really dream of writing at and get their books ready for market. Writing at pro level is not something that we fall out of bed doing. And it takes a little training, a little mentorship, and that's what I love to provide at Path of the Storyteller. So thank you guys for watching live. There is a wonderful group here today who I know are interested in the topic at hand, which is third acts. When I announced to my mailing list that that would be the topic this week, and I have to thank my dear Deb, who had a question about third acts and submitted it, and I jumped on the opportunity to do a live stream about third acts because I know how important they are, and I know what a challenge they can be to writers. The ending, it's got to be good, right? We need a good ending. We need a great ending to really leave our readers, satisfied. And it's not always self-evident what makes a great ending. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Thank you. For those of you who are here live, please feel free to leave a comment in the chat box. And if you're watching on Facebook, you know what to do. You can go to StreamYard.com/Facebook and just let them know that it's okay to show your name so that I can know who's asking a question. Or you could stay private. You could just be a Facebook user if that's what you want your identity to be today. I think you can do better than that, though. So let's see who's here. Hey, Terry, great to see you. Hey, Chris, wonderful to see you. I can see that there are a bunch more watching as well. It's terrific. So third acts, my friends, third acts. Some of you immediately said, oh, this is so timely, and I kind of had a feeling because I know a lot of you have been working on books for a while and you're at the point where the ending is in sight. Or maybe you finished a draft and you're revising. And so the question of what makes a great third act is top of mind. Now, there's a lot to say about it. Forgive me for going a little fast. I'm going to try to get through a lot of material today, but I do want to leave time for questions because I imagine that you might have some. So without further ado, let's dive into this question, not only of what is a third act, but what must it contain in order to be truly satisfying to the reader? That's what we're going to talk about today. So very quickly, those of you who are new to the idea of story structure or three-act structure, when I say the third act, it implies that there were two acts already, right? The first act, the second act, and the third act. This is what we call three-act story structure. Beginning, middle, and end. In the first act, what we're trying to do is establish who the main character is. You'll hear me refer to that main character as the hero for reasons that are going to become clear as we get to know each other better. The first act allows the reader to meet the hero, understand what's wrong, what is that hero's deep need for change, and how does that need for change manifest into a mission of some kind. And that mission is pretty specific, right? It's not, I need to leave home and see the world. No, that's not a mission. A mission is, I need to get to the Emerald City, meet the wizard, and so he could tell me how to get back to Kansas. It's got a lot of detail in it. Like a good mission is specific. It's clear. So this is the job of the first act, is to meet the hero, let us understand why a huge transformation, because that's what a story is a process of transformation. Why is that change necessary? Why this hero is in a state that can't be sustained, right? At the beginning of the tale, something's got to give. And so now that we're going to learn what that is, and we're going to get to the point where that mission has been defined. There's way more to say about first acts, but that's it in a nutshell. All right, the second act is where the mission is endeavored, where the transformation happens. It is a series of difficulties, obstacles, challenges, tests, all of the things that our hero must engage with in order to go through the transformation that the story is promising. If you forgive me for once again going to my food imagery, if the hero is a lump of pasta dough, and we learn in the first act that this is not the destiny of pasta doughs to stay pasta dough, this has got to be turned into Sunday dinner. That's the mission, right? And so the second act is like we shove the dough into the pasta machine and we turn the crank and we apply pressure, because guess how things change? Under pressure. Transformation happens by putting things under pressure, most especially our hero. And not just once. The crank of the pasta dough machine must be turned and turned again. And the pasta comes out one side. And what do? Pasta makers, we put it right back in the machine. We run it through again. We apply more pressure. It gets thinner. It gets, all of the things that happen. It just gets more and more refined, the more pressure we put on it. And then we get to the end of this long second act of being run through the pasta dough machine. And is that the end of the story? No, it is not. Now we're at the third act. And what our hero learns is that getting through the pasta dough machine was not the be all and end all. The mission itself gets to be accomplished at the end of the second act, but there's more to come. This process of training, of having to escalate, of having to transform into a better, stronger, more resilient version, whatever the nature of the change that our hero needs to go through, that is accomplished over the second act, that's not the end of the story. Because they're going to get to the moment where the mission that they've been on all along has to be dealt with. We call that sometimes the ordeal, or the scene that was promised, which is, I think, a more practical way to think of it. At some point in the first act, there was a promise made to the reader that, yes, there's going to be a moment in this story when, Dorothy's going to be standing in front of the wizard, or Bilbo's going to be at the Lonely Mountain standing in front of the dragon. Whatever that mission was, we're going to get there. That scene has been promised, and the reader's been waiting for it the whole second act. That scene, that ordeal, that scene that was promised is not going to be the end of the story. Something's going to happen that is going to reveal that there is a whole new situation, possibly a consequence, an unexpected consequence of what goes on in that scene, that is going to present our hero with a whole new challenge to overcome. And I hesitate before I say challenge, because the nature of this challenge is not like one more test, or, oh, wait, there's another lap to run. It's qualitatively different. And that's what I'm going to talk about, what makes what goes on in the third act kind of qualitatively different than just that series of tests and obstacles that the second act is known for. If we're talking about my pasta dough, it's like, okay, pasta dough, crank, 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 crank. Okay, now I've come out the end. I've been cut. I'm beautiful fettuccine. Am I done? No. That is the moment that our pasta dough realizes that, oh my gosh, I've got to go into a pot of boiling water now in order to fulfill my true destiny. There's a whole other experience being, presented. So what is that experience? That is the third act. So that is my super quick introduction to what is the third act. It's the ending. It is not the same length as the first and second acts. It is, the first act is typically 20 to 25% of the tale, or it could be significantly shorter. The second act is the most of the tale. It could be fully half the length of a book length work. And so that leaves the ending also is a short piece. It's 20 to 25%. All right. Just so you understand what we're working with. I've got like 7 bullet points to get through in terms of what qualities a third act can contain. So let me go through them methodically. Stick with me to the end, because one of the questions that comes up so often is we've all been told, or if we haven't been, I'm telling you now, that one of the marks of a successful third act is that it feels both surprising and inevitable. It's the kind of thing that makes writers pull out their hair. Am I right? Surprising and inevitable. What does that mean? Who came up with that? But I can explain to you what that means. And that is what we're going to get to, how the third act of necessity is both surprising and inevitable. So that's where we're heading here. All right. First point of a third act is that the hero is confronted with something unexpected. It is the consequence of that ordeal, that scene that was promised. It doesn't go the way they planned. It somehow, it's like a suitcase with a false bottom. Something is revealed during that scene that actually kind of flips the hero's whole worldview. And they now have a true understanding of what is at stake and what must be done, what lies ahead, the boiling kettle of salted water that awaits them in the third act. Just when they thought that surviving the pasta machine was the mission, but wait, there's more. One of the great examples of a beautiful third act that I'm sure that you're all familiar with is the third act of Charlotte's Web, which we can quickly summarize. The mission in Charlotte's Web, which takes us throughout the entirety of the first and second acts, is we have a character named Wilbur, who is a young pig born on a farm in which pigs are sold for slaughter. He's a spring pig, and he should be sold for slaughter by Christmas time. The mission is to save Wilbur's life. It's extremely clear. And the means by which this is going to be done is that his friend Charlotte, who is a very talented and unusual spider, is going to create this kind of theatrical presentation to convince everyone that Wilbur is no ordinary pig. And she does this by weaving words into her web. The scene that is promised the reader is like the harvest fair, the festival, right? The county fair, at which Wilbur is going to compete and be very visible. And this is the moment where Charlotte's plan to save his life is either going to work or not work. If he wins a ribbon at the fair, they're not going to slaughter him because he'll be like a local celebrity. So that's the mission, is to get Wilbur to the fair and have him win. And it's through the mechanism of Charlotte creating this unusual phenomenon in her web that it's going to happen. Now, the plot of Charlotte's Web, I know I'm not spoiling this for any of you. It's one of the reasons I chose this book, but it's also a brilliant third act. The plot of Charlotte's Web carries on as all kinds of stuff happens in the second act. They get to the scene that was promised. It's the ordeal. It's the fair. Charlotte does her thing, weaves words into the web, and Wilbur is awarded a prize, and it is determined that he is not going to be slaughtered. Is that the end of Charlotte's Web? Now, those of you who know the book know that that is far from the end of Charlotte's Web. I mean, it's, emotionally far from the end. It's actually quite close physically to the end. Once Charlotte succeeds in her scheme, Wilbur's won the ribbon and he's not going to be slaughtered. The mission is accomplished, right? But what happens? The consequence that is revealed immediately, and this is key, immediately after the mission is accomplished, is that Wilbur discovers, Charlotte reveals to him what she's kept hidden all along, which is that this effort to save Wilbur's life was the very last thing that she's capable of. She is not going to be getting back into the truck and going back to the farm with Wilbur now his life has been saved. She's not going to be there for it. She's going to die in this, barn at the fairgrounds. They're all going to leave her there. And that's it. She does not even have the strength to come down again. It's the end of her time. It's the end of her life. That's the third act of Charlotte's Web. And as you see, it explodes Wilbur's level of engagement with everything. He was so busy thinking about his own life that he didn't imagine that Charlotte wasn't going to survive this escapade. It never occurred to him that she was saving his life, but that there was no way to save hers. You see what a huge turn that is. That's what I mean when I say that there's some unexpected consequence or revelation that just kind of bursts out of that final scene of the second act. And that's what starts the third act, okay? So I want you, all of you who are working on your stories, to think about two things. What is your hero's mission? What is the reader expecting to happen at the end of the second act? What is the scene that was promised? And what unexpected consequence that is thematically far more significant can kind of burst out unexpectedly of that? It's going to be something, that just turns everything on its ear, and it's going to put our hero in a whole new predicament, because Wilbur, who spent the whole book concerned with saving his own life so he doesn't end up bacon in the frying pan, now has a third act in which all he wants to do is to rescue Charlotte's eggs, which she has laid, and they are in a little sack that is held together in spider web. So it's sort of like a little package that could be transported if he can figure out how to do it. He is desperate now to take Charlotte's legacy, her children, and bring them back home with him so that he can now take care of them. Amazing storytelling. Okay, at any age. That's what we're talking about. So think about that. The theme of mortality and the theme of friendship, what we can do for each other, has been kind of bubbling along the whole way in Charlotte's Web. But that moment where the second act gives way to the third is where it kind of blossoms and it becomes the story. There's a phrase that I use in my training in Path of the Storyteller where I talk about the inside dragon and the outside dragon, that there is an outside dragon, an obstacle that everybody can see. It's visible throughout the whole second act. It's the mission, right? That's what we can see. But that incredible moment where the second act gives way to the third is where that inside dragon, which is what was really at stake all along, that theme that was sort of there all along, actually comes out, and now that's what must be dealt with. The problem of saving the life of one little pig is nothing compared to the commitment to the ongoing survival of Charlotte's children and the friendship and the love and relationship and commitment, how meaningful that friendship has become to Wilbur, how to honor that and how to sustain that. It's just a wonderful emotional dive, deep and broad. The story gets deeper and wider at the same time. All right, so now we're in the third act. We've been, shot out of a cannon in a way by those unexpected consequences. Second bullet point of what must happen in the third act: the new qualities that our hero has acquired during the second act, under pressure, going through all of the things that they went through in the second act. They are changed by that, just as we're all changed by challenge. We're all changed by being put under pressure, right? We grow, we fail, and we learn. We expand our capacity. We get outside of our comfort zone, and we become capable of more than we ever dreamed of. That's what's been going on the whole second act. So obviously, our hero is no longer the same. They have new capacities, new understanding. They're able to do things now that they weren't able to do before, and the third act must test those. The third act must put them to the test. So whatever this new situation is that our hero must deal with, it's going to quickly demonstrate all of the things that were learned, all of the growth that was happened. All right, so that's the second thing. Third thing, and this is very common. It seems very specific. Like, how could that be in every story? It actually does turn out to be one of the classic moments of most well-told tales. somewhere in the third act, your hero is going to be presented with the opportunity to sacrifice themselves. And they're going to be willing to do it. And I'm going to put to the side right now, just for argument's sake, stories that are, anti-heroes, noir, kind of inverted journeys to the dark side. I'm talking about the vast majority of stories in which our hero is sort of moving to an improved place, not a perfected place, but the transformation is a step toward their potential. It's a positive growth. Not every story is about that, but the vast majority of them are. That need for sacrifice, the invitation to sacrifice something in order to solve this new third act issue, it could be a symbolic sacrifice. It could be a literal one. It could be the opportunity to give their lives for a worthy cause. It could be, as it is in Charlotte's Web, Wilbur having to strike a deal with another character to give up the thing that he loves most, which of course he's a little pig. Oh, speaking of little pigs, look who's bombing our session today. Ralph, you're on YouTube. Look at you. You're a big star. This is my cat. He's a celebrity now. So the thing that the hero might sacrifice in Wilbur's case is his food. He has to make a deal with another character, Templeton the rat, in which, in order to do what Wilbur desperately needs Templeton's help to accomplish, he will allow Templeton first crack at his food forever. Now, if you are a little pig, you can imagine that it's like, what is the thing that Wilbur can give up? It's a very profound sacrifice for him. But another story, it might actually be a willingness to sacrifice a treasured object, relationship, or even the hero may be willing to sacrifice their own life. That opportunity is going to come. Now, in tragic stories, our hero may in fact sacrifice themselves. They may not survive to the end, but in many stories, the opportunity to sacrifice happens, but the hero survives it. And that is a wonderful archetypal moment that we can sometimes think of as a death and rebirth dynamic. You will very, very often find this in a third act. That is something that is inspired by the work of the great mythologist Joseph Campbell, right, who talked with great insight about some of the recurring motifs in enduring myths. And the death and rebirth of the hero is one of the things that it shows up again and again and again and again in stories. All right. Now, speaking of Templeton the rat, next point that we will very often see in a third act is that some help is going to be necessary. And the hero may not know to ask for it, or may not even be the one who's able to ask for it, that this enormous circumstance of the third act may get to the point where our hero is down for the count. They may not know how to solve this problem. It may seem too much for them. And there is very often, again, this is not a prescription, but you will see it very often, the most unexpected character in the narrative is going to end up being the one who does the thing that's going to allow the third act circumstance to be resolved. There is no more unexpected source of heroic intervention in Charlotte's Web than Templeton the rat. He is the absolute epitome of selfishness. And, he's in it for himself. He's a rat. And yet it is Templeton who is the only one who has the physical capacity to do what must be done to rescue the precious egg sac that Charlotte left behind, so that Wilbur can bring it home and raise Charlotte's little spider babies as his own. And that's the moment that the deal is made. But it falls upon the unlikely character. I sometimes refer to this as the Neville Longbottom moment. So for Harry Potter fans, you know how good it feels when like Neville Longbottom sort of saves the day at the end. He's the most unlikely hero. But at the key moment of the third act, it is an intervention from someone very unlikely that pushes the hero's success kind of over the top so that it can actually resolve. I want to take a moment to talk about this because you might have been told, and you might have heard it from me as well, that the hero is really got to stay the center of the action throughout the whole tale. We don't want the hero becoming passive, incapacitated, and the story migrates, somebody else takes it over, and the hero wakes up at the end and say, "What I miss?" Like that's not satisfying to the reader. Why is it okay, and not only okay, but incredibly satisfying to the reader, to bring in this unlikely source of assistance? Here's my take on it. Our hero has been through so much. They have gone through the trials and revelations and difficulties and obstacles of the second act. They've gone through the ordeal that ends the second act, and they've grappled with the shock of learning the thing that now must be accomplished in the third act. They have been transformed. They have been put under relentless pressure. And one of the rewards of that work is that their own heroic energy, their own capacity to wear the mask of the hero, to be the source of archetypal heroic energy in the tale, is now larger than their own skin. And the world around them and the people around them are going to start to be impacted by it. Classic scene from cinema, old movie buffs. I'm Spartacus. Give me a thumbs up in the comments if you know the I'm Spartacus scenes from the movie Spartacus. There comes a moment when one person's heroic energy bubbles so brilliant, it shines so brightly that it begins to have an impact on those around them. And I believe that one of the things that we love to see in a third act is that it is evidence. Yay, I've got one I'm Spartacus. Thank you, Terry. I appreciate it. Anyone else out there who's Spartacus, feel free to stand up and shout it out loud. This is your big moment. When we can see that what the hero's gone through is starting to, have this impact, it's starting to glow around them and into the world, this is very satisfying because this is what we want from our heroes. We don't want to settle for them just transforming themselves. Ultimately, the hero's journey is like transformational to the community, to the larger world. All right. So I feel that the evidence of a Neville Longbottom, right? A Templeton the Rat, Bard is the character in The Hobbit who serves this like temporary, takes on the mask of the hero, does something without which our hero would not succeed. The real hero of The Hobbit is Bilbo, but it takes a little intervention from somebody else who's very unexpected. We haven't even met him before in The Hobbit. It's the hero's energy is now like it's now forming puddles, like it's spilling out. It's going beyond the borders of the hero's skin. And I think that that's actually quite satisfying because the story is getting deeper and wider. So let me just quickly recap. The hero's dealing with the unexpected consequences of the ordeal. That was our first bullet point. The new qualities that they earned all throughout the second act are being put to the test. The opportunity for some meaningful sacrifice may emerge and be required, and the help of some unexpected and, in fact, perhaps very unlikely ally may turn up. All right. Moving on. Next bullet point. The reader is going to see, without question, evidence in the third act that our hero is not the same as they were in the first act. And now think about this yourselves as readers. If your hero goes on a whole journey of transformation and they get to the end and they're still the same, that is the very definition of a story that the reader goes, nothing really happened. It's not that nothing happened. It's that nothing internally shifted in the main character. A lot can happen on the outside, but if the main character has not shifted at all, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, nothing happened. So we must make sure that we get that, and that when we conceive of our third acts, that we're thinking of our hero not as they were, but as they are still up until the very last page, in a state of becoming. So that evidence is an absolute necessity in the third act. One more bullet point here, actually two more. One other thing that we want to make sure that our third acts contain is this the promise of the premise has been fulfilled, but its meaning is also expressed. So when I say the promise of the premise, this is a story about a pig on a farm who wants to live to see another day. This is a story about a girl from Kansas who gets sent to a strange world. She wants to get home. This is a story about a teenage governess in Victorian England who's given 3 children raised by wolves to tame and civilize and protect. The premise of a book can be stated in a sentence, and that sentence includes a promise. It's like, is Wilbur going to survive? We're promising that's going to be delivered. Is Bilbo going to go on this adventure and survive it? That's the promise of the premise, is that we're going to know that by the end, right? Is the governess going to manage to bond with these children, or are they going to end up being sent back to the forest? That's the promise of the premise. The reader expects it. Another great example is A Wrinkle in Time, right? So the character of Meg Murray, the premise is her father is missing. She's going to go rescue him. You can say it in one sentence. So make sure that you know what the premise of your book is, promised, because the third act is where you've got to deliver on that promise. That's something you have to check. Is the promise of the premise fulfilled? Now, it's not enough to say, yes, Wilbur survived. It's not enough to say, yes, Meg found her father. It's good, but the other piece that the third act must deliver is this deepening of what I call the inside dragon, that the theme of it all has come to the surface. What was underneath? Was it a story about mortality and how precious friendship is, given that we're all going to die, which is what Charlotte's Web is about? Go third graders. What a deep book it truly is. That's what it's about. It's not just about whether Wilbur survives. So the third act, you have to make sure that what the book is really about gets to the surface. It comes out. That is what is expressed. But you also have to tell the reader whether Wilbur survives, right? So you need to do both. You need to fulfill that promise, and you need to let the meaning of the story be expressed out there where the reader can see it. All right. Now, here's my last bullet point, and then I want to talk about this tension between the inevitable and the surprising. So my last bullet point of what your third act really wants to contain in order to be satisfying to the reader is you may want to give or imply some glimpse of what happens beyond the margins of the last page, and particularly how the world has been changed by what our hero has been through. And when I say the world, it might be the world, right? It might be the world, but it might be the world of the story. It might be a family in Kansas, right? Or it might be an epic landscape of Middle Earth, right? That a war between 5 armies has been stopped. So you can see that when I say the world, it could be as intimate as a family or community, or it could literally be a nation, a town, a neighborhood, a nation, the world itself. One of the glories of fiction is that we get to make up stories that can operate on this very intimate scale and on this larger scale, even at the same time. So that's what we want to do. We want to think about giving a glimpse. Now, this can happen in a very literal way. I'm sure many of you can think of a book that you know or a book that you've read where there's some inclusion, even if it's very quick, in the final pages, perhaps, of what happened after. I can't use both hands because I've got a cat in my lap and he's sitting on one of my hands. So picture air quotes on both sides. The end. After we type the end and the reader gets to that long awaited moment, that we can give them a sense of what happens to these characters afterwards. You know, did they live happily ever after? Did Wilbur manage to stay connected to Charlotte's lineage of children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, right? In fact, he does. It's an incredibly beautiful final gesture in that book, that the eggs hatch and the baby spiders are born. And of course, there are thousands of them. And so they don't all stay. In fact, almost all of them fly away. But 3 of them stay. And what we learn, both hands back. Thanks for the visit, Ralph. You kept me nice and warm. What we learn at the end of Charlotte's Web is that there are always a couple of each generation of spiders, of Charlotte's progeny, who choose to stay and be with Wilbur. And so it's an extremely darling and dear and emotional concept to think of how short the lifespan of the spider is versus the lifespan of the pig, and how his love for Charlotte and his friendship, it just extends down generations. So you see how this intimate little story that's, takes place in a farm, now it's opened up. It's got this feeling of a theme of commitment that spans generations, a kind of a friendship that will never die. It's got a beautiful scope to it. So we too, in our third act, might want to indicate for our reader what they could imagine happens to the characters in the future. There's a wonderful ending into the great Kipling short story, Rikki Tikki Tavi. With Rikki, our brave mongoose hero, goes through the whole narrative, gets to the very end, and the narrator simply tells us, and Rikki kept that garden as a mongoose should keep it, with tooth and claw and bite, and never a cobra dared show its head in the walls. Just a little gesture that we know not only that Rikki prevailed in this particular journey, but that he had to keep fighting, keep protecting, and that was his life to come, that he had sort of taken on the role of keeping this particular garden safe from cobras. So those little gestures, I think there's one that people talk about at the end of the Harry Potter series as well, where we're just sort of told how people grow up. I include a section at the end of my Incorrigible Children series where our 2 main characters at that point in the tale, Penelope and Simon, the narrator doesn't tell us how they end up, but they themselves have a kind of a playful conversation about, what do you think the future holds? And they just play with that idea for a moment. So this impulse to just give a little bit of a sense of where we might be going beyond the margin of the page is very satisfying to the reader, if it's appropriate for your story. All right, my last point, and then we're definitely going to want any questions that you have, because I have raced through a ton of material here, is this notion of inevitable and surprising. So what about what I've talked about today is surprising, right? Well, the big moment of surprise is that push from the second act into the third, that moment when the story becomes about saving Charlotte's eggs and Wilbur's commitment to go way outside his comfort zone, do things he's never done before, sacrifice the thing dearest to him, right, in order to honor that love that he has for Charlotte, who gave her life for his. And that's a surprise. We weren't expecting that. The story did not, up until that point, it was about a pig who needed to win a ribbon at a fair. And then there's the surprise. So the quality of that unexpected revelation, that consequence of the end of the second act, when the outside dragon kind of gets resolved, but then the inside and says, yeah, but what about me? What about mortality and friendship? That's what this book has been about all along. Now we're going to deal with that. That's the surprise. That third act it feels so right because in a way it's what the book has been about all along, but now it's out there where the reader can see it. So it's a surprise and it's inevitable. It's not that the surprise is something thematically new. It's simply this flipping of energy between what's been going on the outside and what's been going on the inside. The story just kind of flips, and now we get the full emotional, psychological, spiritual theme right out there where we can see it, and the new difficulties that our hero must undergo in pursuit of resolving whatever this new circumstance is are going to be the recognizable fruits of all of that hero's labors. So that's something else that feels inevitable. We've seen our hero learn these lessons, and now in the third act, they get put to use. It's like a puzzle piece falling into place. We've seen our hero all through the second act, perhaps form important alliances, do good deeds, help people or forces when it didn't seem strictly necessary. In the third act, all of that goodwill comes back to help them, right? We've seen our hero grow from some character in the first act who had some transformation in store into a character in the third act who is like oozing hero energy out of their pores, so much so that unexpected impacts might happen on the Neville Longbottoms of their world. It's surprising because it's not what we were imagining Neville was going to do, but it also feels inevitable because, of course, he's had the example set for him. We've seen it with our own eyes that the example has been set. So that's the tension between this quality of being inevitable and surprising. The things that happen are perhaps unexpected. New things will continue to happen, right? The story will continue up until the last page. But we've seen the underpinnings of those surprises. We got it. We were getting what the theme was all along on a unexpressed level. Now it's expressed. We were seeing our hero develop these qualities. Now they get put to the test. We were seeing our hero earn the loyalty and admiration of these other characters. In the third act, that's all going to pay off. So that's what that is all about. It's not just a dumb challenge like make it blue and red. Like, no. You can make it inevitable and surprising, but those words mean something in the context of third acts. All right. So I'm going to start looking in the comments. Anybody who's got questions about endings, third acts, anything that's come up during this talk, it's time to type them in. All right. And I'm going to give you a minute to do that. Because it takes a second sometimes for the comments to show up. So I'll give you a minute to type them in, and let me spend the rest of our time answering any questions that you have. And while you're typing, I just wanted to sort of sum up by just asking the question, why is this all so important? The third act is where the reader decides whether they are satisfied with the story or not. Things can be going very well up until the third act. And if the third act does not satisfy, this tale does not satisfy. So that's very important. The third act is where the true meaning of the story is revealed. So that matters a lot. Another thing about a third act that's important is that it is going to move swiftly, because we don't have to explain anything anymore. Everything that needs to be set up has been set up. Our reader now is fully on board with all the ins and outs of the rules of the world. So nothing needs to be explained. And also our hero's development is largely complete. And so the more leisurely pace of the second act, in which our hero has to try things, fail, struggle, be ambivalent, refuse to do things, then do them, need mentorship, like all of that kind of going back and forth energetically that we've seen our hero do. That's over now. We're in the third act. Our hero is ready for this. If the second act has done its job, our hero is ready for what is ahead, this brief, essential, final circumstance that must be dealt with. Our hero's ready. So it can move swiftly because there's not all this prevaricating, right? I hope that makes sense. It's the difference between a rehearsal and showtime, right? If you're in the orchestra and it's a rehearsal, you stop and start, you go over the bits that were hard, you take it from the top, you do all those things. On the night of the concert, lights up, the baton comes down, the performance begins, and you are going to play it straight through to the end. That's what a third act should feel like. So when people talk about pace, again, there's a lot of words about story structure that get bandied about. Pace, people say, oh, that means it has to go quickly. Well, it's going to go swiftly, but why? I always want to ask, why is it going swiftly? It's going swiftly because this is the performance. It's not a rehearsal. Stopping and starting over is not an option anymore. Our hero is past that. So please always think about the why when you get these words in your head. All right. All right. So that's some final points. Now I'm hoping we've got we've got a couple of comments. Let me bring up someone from Chris, just in case anybody's interested in this show, which I confess I do not know. So Chris shares, the end of season 1 of Lupin on Netflix is a perfect example of inevitable but surprising. All right. Well, Chris knows good storytelling. So if she recommends that, I imagine it's a good watch. So take that to heart, everyone. Thank you for sharing that, Chris. And let's see, we've got a comment here. Deb, the founder of The Feast, who had a question about third acts to begin with. Thank you so much for asking this. It was a really fun thing to talk about. Thank you so much. Exactly the plot points you needed clarified. My pleasure. You're very, very welcome. That's why we're here. And hey, Jaren, it's great to see you here. I didn't see you before. All right, let's take your comment up where we can talk about it. Jaren says, I'm assuming that a well-written third act by necessity leans, so to speak, on the first two. Absolutely. And serves to carry the reader to the character's final state. Absolutely. This is very, very true. And when you say leans on the first two, that's extremely important for everyone to remember. It's actually very insightful because you see that the moment that creates the third act is the mission that is defined in the first act. In the first act, that's when we learn exactly what it is that our hero's need for transformation is, and the specificity of the mission is defined. And that specificity carries us all the way through the second act until we get to the scene that was promised, where the mission is faced. And that's the moment where the circumstance of the third act is created. That unexpected twist, this new revelation, this thematically more present deepening and widening of the events of the tale, this new circumstance that is just far more meaningful than what has come before, and yet is of a piece with it. It's just a kind of a energetic shift. It's not the outside, I gotta kill a dragon, blah, blah, blah. No, it's the inside. Oh my gosh, that dragon represented greed. And now guess what? Now that the dragon's dead, everybody wants the gold. 5 armies marching, and just poor little Bilbo's got to solve it, right? So you see how everything just kind of blossoms into its true expression. Like, we're not burying the theme anymore. We are building the story out of the theme directly. So what Jaren says is extremely true. Our third act is fully rises out of the work we've done previously. And it's a great point to end on, Jaren, because anybody who's in the third act and is lost and is saying, I need an ending, but I don't exactly know what it is. I don't exactly know where to go. It just seems like I'm adding car chases and explosions. I'm just adding more busyness. I know it needs to be exciting, so I just keep adding new exciting things, but it just seems not to feel like an ending, doesn't feel quite right. Here's where you need to look. You need to go back to the first act and you need to find out if you gave your hero a clear mission, then you need to go back and figure out what the need for transformation was then. And then you need to look at your second act and you need to see if they actually acquired anything. Did the pressure of the second act prepare them for being the version of themselves that this whole story was designed to bring into being? So we need to go back and look. It's too late to add explosions in the third act to try to fool the reader into something that's happening. That's not the place for them. The third act is action packed, but this is the action of the theme in motion, of the true subject of the tale, whether it's friendship, mortality, greed, family, whatever has been at stake all along is now put right out there where the reader can see it. All right. Wonderful. Okay, guys, this has been a tremendously fun hour. As always, I am grateful for your attendance live, your participation. If you're watching on the replay, I'm grateful for that too. If you have questions, you can leave them in the comments down below on YouTube or in the Facebook group, Path of the Storyteller, and I will answer. We'll keep the conversation going. And if you're not on my mailing list, I would love for you to be on my mailing list. It's easy to find at www.pathofthestoryteller.com. That is my site for writers. And I love knowing who y'all are and getting to know you and your work better. And if you're watching on YouTube and you haven't subscribed to the channel, it's a great help to me if you do subscribe and click the little bell so you can get some notifications when I've got some new content going on. We're here every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Pacific, and I hope that I see you next time. Thank you all so much for being here.